You're listening to This Motorcycle Life, conversations about why we ride. Episode 54, The Nicest People. I'm Bruce Philp, and thank you for listening. Would you ride with me? Could I ride with you? What does it even take to be a great riding companion? Well, in a moment, you're going to meet someone who knows a thing or two about rolling with people you can count on. And it turns out that showing up on time and knowing how to ride are just the beginning. It also turns out that motorcycling has a lot more to give us if we're willing to share it. Well, this conversation challenged me in a way I did not see coming, and I loved it. We'll get to that in a moment, but first, this. The housekeeping portion of this episode is going to be short. Thanks once again to Adam Gozy and Kelly Birch for the wonderful recurring donations. I won't do this forever, guys, but I want to make sure you know how much I appreciate the help. Thanks, too, to a couple of folks who found the merch store this past month. And thanks to my new pal Steve from just down the road in Minising for personally delivering a donation to Movember this week. It was great to meet you. If you'd like to show your appreciation for this content, please hit the Support TML tab on my website to find out how you can do that. And thank you for considering it. This episode will also mark the end of a favorite feature of mine, and that's the TML playlist recommendation. There are a couple of reasons that I think the time has come to let this go. One is that it's simply becoming too hard to reach the people who could okay featuring a track on the show, and trying to do that has turned out to burn a lot of time. The other is that the rights landscape is becoming more complicated. Too complicated to make any sense for a non-commercial one-man show to navigate, so as we all must sometimes do when it comes to motorcycling, I have to choose discretion over valor. Well, hopefully the people we get to meet on this podcast are the important thing anyway, which brings me to this one. As subcultures go, I've always found motorcyclists to be remarkably united around the fundamental principles and joys of what we do. Still, there are lots of ways to sort us into piles if one is so inclined, and one of the most common has to do with the company we ride in, or specifically, I guess, whether we ride in any company at all. Though solitary riding is part of almost every motorcyclist's diet, there are those of us, who will openly declare, I ride alone. It even sounds cool to say, conjuring up the burnished archetype of the self-exiled anti-hero, the brooding and introspective lone wolf. Well, that's what I tell myself anyway. The truth is probably a lot less romantic than that. The truth, for me, and for a lot of lone wolves, is that we're simply introverted, or we don't want to negotiate the experience with anybody, or that we don't want to compromise a ride with mismatched skills or expectations. Or all of the above, or even some reasons we're less proud of. With a very few, very special exceptions, I have avoided riding companions for all of them, while peering over the fence wistfully at groups of motorcyclists who always seem to be having the best day ever. In this sense, I suppose I'm not so much of a lone wolf as I am a lone golden retriever. But I am pretty sure that I'm not alone, if you'll forgive the irony, and I've always thought that the art of being a great riding buddy, and maybe why we should care, would make for an interesting conversation with the right person. And it's the very first thing I thought of when I met the person you're about to meet, Bubba Eisenhauer. Well, the things that make a motorcyclist interesting are very often at the intersection of motorbikes and whatever else they do in their lives. For Bubba, that intersection was with his time as a platoon leader in the 75th Ranger Regiment of the U.S. Army. The Rangers are those no-one-left-behind folks. Bubba is a passionate motorcyclist who's also had some of the best leadership training in the world, and who's made a profession out of being around and nurturing people that he can rely on to take care of each other. Well, I was pretty sure I could learn something. It turned out to be a masterclass, as well as a slightly uncomfortable look in the mirror. I caught up with Bubba Eisenhauer at his home in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Bubba, it's great to speak to you. Thanks for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you today.
It's a pleasure. And are you staying cool out there? I don't want to make you jealous, but you might hear some rain in the background over the time we're going to speak. Is it a little toasty?
It is very toasty here. I am definitely jealous of the rain, but I did get to spend a couple hours with my son in the pool today, so I do enjoy that time that I get with him. But it is definitely hot on the bike.
I see that. You shared some photos with me, and so I kind of got to meet your son vicariously through that. And you look like a pretty happy dad, a pretty proud dad, and he looks like a great kid. So maybe you're not suffering too much.
He is the best.
Yeah. Well, look, I really appreciate you being up for this. I'm kind of stoked to talk to someone with some, sort of genuine expertise on a subject that is pretty close to the heart of motorcycling for lots of people. But for lots of other people, it's sort of a totally foreign concept. I had briefly considered calling this the introvert's guide to being a riding buddy. It's probably is not good marketing, so I'll have something better by the time we publish. But anyway, I won't get too far ahead of my skis here, but I am super keen to hear what you think about this subject because of the unique background that you've got. So why don't we start with the sort of official motorcycle podcasters, standard icebreaker, which is how did motorcycles come into your life?
That is a great question. There's currently a meme about this, or maybe a reel or social media video about the old biker down the street. Showed me some stuff, and that's how I got into motorcycles. But I think I always enjoyed things growing up, and I remember this is kind of a tangent, but my grandfather, both actually my grandfathers, passed away when I was 10 years old.
Oh dear!
But at one of their funerals, I remember seeing it was a very well known club come in. And they were paying respects to one of their members who had passed. But I just remember that stood out to me on that day, and I just liked the way that they showed the respect. And they were very respectful of my family and my grandfather. And so that image kind of stuck with me, where I just thought that was one of the manliest things I've ever seen in my life. So I think I was drawn to it initially from that at a young age, but didn't really grow up with a family of riders until we all got a little bit older. And me, my brother, my dad all got bikes about the same time, a little over 10 years ago now, and then have never looked back. So we've been riding together kind of as a family and then on our own for probably 15-ish years.
Wow. Nice. So not from childhood. That's interesting. Although I have to say the image that you described is pretty vivid. That would leave an impression on me too. Yes, very, very dramatic picture. Wow. So that helps with the time frame, and it makes me wonder. You had I have to assume a distinguished career in the military, which given the unit that you served in, I'm going to assume was distinguished. You were an Army Ranger platoon leader, and I think I read somewhere that particular branch of the service is one of the busiest, if I can use that word, in the U.S. military by far. And if, again, apologies if that seems to, make it sound trivial, but were you able to keep bikes in your life during that time while you were serving? And if so, how did you make them fit?
That's a great question. So when I was stateside, I did. It was something that, for me, whether it was commuting to and from work when I was working stateside, or for just my kind of temporary escape for myself. I know that you've had quite a few podcasts about different, I think, benefits from motorcycling, but a couple that stand out to me was you spoke to a lieutenant colonel from the Air Force, and I don't want to butcher his name, but
it's a tough one. Joe Leondike.
Okay, yes, Leondike. And so Colonel Leondike talked about kind of the science behind it. And then there's somebody else who spoke about how it's essentially meditating. So that was something for me, even pre-military in my life, that I found was very important to me. It helped me reset. It helped me kind of process sometimes harder things going on in my life. And there's been many times where that has been kind of a lifeline for me. And so in the military, it absolutely was something that I prioritized if I could. So yeah, I think that the time where I was in and I was home, although I did not get a ride as much as I would like. I did spend one time about 12 months straight overseas. So obviously during that time I was limited. But then coming home, that was a priority to get back on the bike as soon as I could.
Yeah. I would think after your family, that would be the thing you would picture the most wistfully if you were away. Yeah, I understand. Well, I can try to understand. And so I know you mentioned you ride with family, and again, sort of creeping on your Instagram a little bit and looking at the photos that you shared with me, I kind of got the vibe that you're pretty selective about who you ride with. Would you say that's a fair statement?
Yes and no. I think that who I choose to travel with would be decently selective. However, I love riding and meeting people. I'm thinking of a story real fast. I can share it.
Yeah, please.
About how I met my godson's, or my son's godparents. Sorry. And so it was just kind of at least the military and the riding community and riding with people all together, where I had just gotten home from a deployment, and just due to, it was right during COVID, right when that was beginning. And so everything was shut down. I was limited in my abilities to travel and to ride, but I was able to go on actually, this was when I was getting selected or going through my selection process for Ranger Regiment, which is the Ranger unit that I was a part of. And so I was there and I really wanted to ride, and I had some deployment money saved up. And so there was a bike, and it was actually the same bike that I had, but it did have a jockey shift on it, which I had never ridden before. But I was like, hey, this is close by. I can Uber there. If I like it, I can buy this bike and just go on a ride, especially before this intense selection process. And so I went to this house, and this couple comes out, and they had the bike ready for me to look at. And I was like, hey, I've never done this before. So I don't, here's the money, I don't want to make you uncomfortable, that I won't pay it if I drop it or break it or anything. And so they gave me a brief tutorial. I rode it around a little bit, and I was like, I am so bad at this. And as long as I could get it going, I could get out at first, I was fine, but it was brutal. And I was like, you know what? For kind of a split second thing, I won't be able to enjoy riding like I normally do. I'm just going to pass on it, And they had said, I think somebody else showed up right when I was leaving or right then. And I know a couple of people were looking at it. And I was like, somebody who has the time is probably going to enjoy this much more than I will right now. Thank you so much. And, but they were also a military couple. So we spent a little time talking. And so later that night, they reached out and they said, hey, we know you just got back from the deployment. We know how much riding means to you. We would love for you to take one of our other bikes and just be able to go on a ride.
Wow.
And they literally brought by a KLR that my son's godfather has and put a lot of time into and a lot of miles on. And so this was his main bike and one that he loved. And he's like, hey, I want you to take this bike and be able to just go on a ride and enjoy it. And the kindness and the beauty of that whole situation connected me with them. And so it was people that I didn't know, who I never would have known other than turning down buying their motorcycle. Right. And they showed me that kindness. And so obviously that we have a deep connection now, where they became later, when my son came into the world, they became his godparents, and I love them dearly. But I rode with them, and I ride with them still. They're overseas right now, but when they get back, I'm sure we will have many more adventures. So I wasn't that selective then. To answer the question, I've been, I think I've been blessed to ride with a lot of clubs out here that I enjoy riding with and meeting new people. But as far as when I travel, it's typically with people that I spend time with and know well.
Right. Okay, that's an interesting distinction. I have to think about that. And I guess, so, I mean, because I'm sort of selective, but maybe I'm selective in the same way that you are, in that it's a way bigger deal to me who I would ride a long distance with and pitch a tent with. But it seems like a reasonable bridge to the question that brought us together, which is kind of, in the simplest terms, how to be a great riding buddy, maybe how to know one when you see one. And so we're going to talk about that, but I want to first of all get on the table that I want to make it very clear that at no point in this conversation am I going to compare riding motorcycles to the job that you did for your country. I know that's absurd. We're talking because I think you know a lot about having to count on the people around you. So if I accidentally wander into some kind of dumb comparison while we're talking, I'll apologize in advance. But I just want to acknowledge that you're here as an expert witness, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I think that like the human connection is about comparing experiences, and though nothing straight correlates, experiencing riding at whatever you ride, as long as it's two wheels, right? Like there's going to be some connection there. So I absolutely understand, and I think that's great. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, cool. You're very gracious. You should have a podcast. So with that, why don't we dig in? I guess it wouldn't overstate things, or tell me if you agree, that as soon as there are two or more of us riding together, the stakes, whatever they may be, go up parabolically. You pointed out to me in our email exchange before we spoke today that you would include riding with a pillion, which I hadn't even considered, and of course it's absolutely true. You would agree, I assume, that as soon as there are two or more people around motorcycles, the stakes go up a lot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For many reasons.
Yeah. Do you want to mention a few? Because I was going to ask you how you would characterize those stakes.
I think when you're riding, especially on your own bike, you typically know your bike well. You know how it functions. You know how you move. You typically anticipate. I think that's something a lot of riders can relate to. But if you're riding two up, or you're riding with somebody next to you, that ability to maneuver just got cut in half if there's somebody next to you. With somebody on the back, the weight's different. Your stopping power is different. Your their understanding of where to sit comfortably, depending on the bike that you have,
right,
matters drastically. So I think that all that enhances everything. And then you're also responsible for someone else's life. Right. If you're choosing to ride with somebody, you're taking that responsibility on yourself. And so I think that it just obviously ups the stakes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I realize that was a blinding statement of the obvious, but it sort of gives us a springboard for some of the things I think we're going to get into. And I loved an observation that you made in that email exchange, which was that the qualities of a good riding buddy, and therefore I assume the stakes that we're talking about, are valued across almost all motorcycle cultures. That it's one of the small number of really important things that we share. And you drew the spectrum from the club scene to adventure riding, I think was how you put it. And that seems super true to me, and on a level above most recreational activities that I can think of. Do you have any further thoughts on how this is a uniting theme in motorcycling?
Well, I think that when you choose to ride somebody, I think that, okay, I don't want to get too philosophical on this, but I think that riding is one of the most beautiful things in the world, where it puts you at the present moment.
Yeah.
And so if you're choosing to ride with somebody else, you're choosing to exist in that moment with them wholly. You're not thinking about what's next. You're not thinking about what's going on. You're thinking about making sure that they're good, that you're good, and just enjoying that moment. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is something like that you have to trust them to be able to do and not take away from, or that they're capable of doing it without hindering that experience. So I think that something that actually spoke a lot to me, and I'm going to relate this back to the military if I can.
Yeah.
So one time I went and I was riding with the club that I met one of the members. They were super nice. They're like, hey, we're going to go on a ride, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. And they didn't know me at all, right? So I went out there and I was like, yeah, you guys seem all right. You at least seem cool. I'd love to go on a ride with you guys. And one of the first things they do is they say, like, what's your riding experience? Have you ever ridden a pack before? And is your bike up to date with maintenance? What's your tire pressure at? When's the last time you had an oil change? and they go through all that with you.
Wow.
So I was talking with one of the members, and literally as I'm talking to him, he like goes and checks my tire pressure, make sure it's spec'd correctly, checks a few things that he's like, I don't know, like I just want to check it, make sure you're good to go. And he goes, because us allowing you to be with us, he's like, I didn't trust that. It's not about me trusting you. I just don't know you. So for me to let you enter this part of our lives with us and our safety, I want to make sure that you're good to go and that I can trust you in the future when you say that you've done these things. And I thought that was super amazing. Like it was such a learning opportunity.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing that we do in the military, where you have to know the people that you're working with, and you want to know their strengths, their weaknesses. And even when you know those things, before you ever go do even a training exercise, I have other people checking myself, and I'm checking them for things that you've done hundreds of times. But like, hey, okay, do you have your radio set up correctly? Where's this stuff in which pouch? So that you can just muscle memory and grab things when you need it and go through those things. But we all check each other, even though we know, and I watch them set it up and I know it's correct, I'm still going to go check them. And so I think that correlation, it wasn't about saying that I didn't do something. It was about building that trust and that community and that ability to not worry about external circumstances in a moment. And I thought that was wonderful.
That is super cool. I've never heard of that before. It makes all the sense in the world. I imagine there are some riders who would have trouble with it, but I think that's really smart. Because the next question I was going to ask you was, and I was kind of visualizing the issue from a leader's perspective. So that's where the question was going to come from. I was going to kind of say, so what are some clues that you can trust someone to ride with you? But what you just told me is the answer is, trust but verify, if I'm using that phrase correctly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think I'll share a funny story with, I guess it's funny to me at least. And I was talking to my brother earlier today, and I was telling him that I was doing this later, and so we were just talking about funny stories and experiences that we've had, and we were just saying how important it is sometimes to, again, know the people that you're riding with, and maybe sometimes do some test rides so that you know their capabilities. And for me personally, I'm like, I will grind it out on the road. So I've done a couple of trips across the country on a dyno with 8 hangers and just 8 wind the whole time, like half helmet. So like that's where I was living, rain, shine. I like that moment, and I did it in a couple of days. So I was doing like 1,000-mile days and just crushing those miles. Now I have realized that not everybody has that same enjoyment of crushing miles like that I do. And so if you choose to put down a lot of miles with somebody, but they've never done it before, or they don't take their bike out as regularly, it can hinder that experience. And even if they enjoy it, sometimes their bodies aren't in the right shape at the time to do it.
Right.
So I think one of the trips that we took, my brother and I took a ton of trips together, but we've done a 6-hour trip, and like you just sit on your bike, fill up the gas, and go. And then we went to Vegas one time, and the second half, which is 3 hours from us, it's probably like, I don't know, 180 miles, and just not that far. And the second half of that trip was just miserable, just from being fatigued, it being way too hot. So like, I don't know if you see this or if it's the same on all types of bikes, but if your hip flexors give out and then you just get those wide knees where your legs just kind of are on the pegs, but there's nothing holding them close to the bike. And so like that was some of the people we were riding with on this trip, and but having to stop constantly, which builds frustration and kind of can hinder the trip. So sometimes it's important to verify the background or the self-confidence that people have by doing some smaller trips too, which is the same thing that we did in the service, right? You don't just join and then you go fight. You do small training exercises. Every single year you build up from like the smallest group all the way to your biggest group. So like 3 guys are going to do their fighting exercise together, and then it grows to 10 guys. And And then you got 10 guys, and that grows to 40 guys. But every single thing is done on an individual basis to grow and to build up that ability, and just you constantly recycle. So even if you're a good writer, but you haven't written in a while, it can kind of reset.
Yeah. Huh. So would you, I mean, in your experience, would you be consciously auditioning someone like that, or would they know they were being auditioned, or is it a more subtle process, do you think?
I would say it's more of a subtle thing, but it wouldn't necessarily be a planned, like I'm not auditioning them. I think that I just would never take somebody on a longer trip the first time I met them or rode with them. Yeah. I might have known them my whole life, but if I've never ridden with them, I'm going to ride with them a little bit first. So like, hey, let's, you want to go grab lunch an hour away and just try that out and see how that little trip goes, and then see how they are at the end of it before I would ever introduce somebody or bring them on a longer trip.
I'm smiling because I think someone did this to me, and they're probably listening right now. That's funny. This is so obviously thunderingly smart when you just say it. I'm wondering, I saw one of these motivational speakers on LinkedIn or Instagram or something recently who was talking about how teams are built in a military setting. And I think, I don't think this guy had ever served. People love talking about the military in boardrooms. But he said that being valued on a team was about a combination of performance and trust. And that if you were forced to compromise on one of those things, you'd compromise on performance before you'd compromise on trust. So in other words, I guess if he were a motorcyclist, he'd rather ride with someone who was less skillful, but that you could count on them to be consistent or whatever, than the other way around. What do you think about that? Does he have it right?
I would, for that situation, yes. For writing, I think that we kind of talked at the beginning about how important it is when you're writing with somebody else, and you take it upon yourself, if you're writing with somebody, that like, if you make an error that impedes them or affects them, that's their life.
Yeah.
It really is that serious on a bike. And so I think if somebody's honest and like, hey, you know what? Because again, I was once a young rider who didn't have a lot of time under me, and when I rode with other people, and they're like, "Have you ridden with other people before?" I'd just say no, and they're like, "All right, you're in the back," and then as you get comfortable, kind of ease your way up. If you need to, the middle lane should stay open. So like, if you're not stopping quick enough, go in the middle. That's the safe place for you. So they gave me some pointers and allowed me to catch up my skill level. Whereas I've ridden with people who would just say like, yeah, I'm good to go. And they've almost hurt me or themselves, or actually hurting themselves before. So I think that was way more detrimental to the situation, to try to have a false sense of bravado or of pride, which it really impacted them and kind of the future and their passion for riding. So I think that, being honest is the most important part of that.
Yeah.
So giving up a little bit of your skill or pushing that skill to make sure somebody else is comfortable.
Yeah. Wow. That's, talk about stakes. I mean, it made sense intuitively to me. I think, we'll talk in a second about kind of a minimum threshold for skill, but as a forced choice, it made sense to me that you would choose character over, over performance in a situation like that. But I kind of wondered how it looked from your point of view. I have to say, like, my experience of being anyone's riding buddy is fairly limited. But I do ride and camp with a small group of guys that I like and trust a lot, and we seem to click, and they seem willing to put up with me. And based on that, well, because that could be a bit of a princess. Based on that, I ride a KTM. That's all you need to know. But based on that very small data set, I tried to make a list of qualities that I thought that I guessed might get you invited to ride again. Might be the foundation of a decent riding buddy. So I thought I had maybe a kind of a lightning round. I would bounce a few of these off of you and tell me what you think of these, both as a fellow rider, but also as someone who has had to lead people in stressful situations. Because that's that's the allegory we're working here. And so that's the first one. Is it seems to me that as patient as everybody might be, you've got to meet a certain skill threshold, and you've got to maintain those skills, even if it means preparing, even if it means practicing, if that makes sense. You know, the admission to a group requires, clearing the bar at some level. Would you agree that's true?
Absolutely. Yeah, like 100%. I think that practicing is important, even if it's on your own. So I think on the writing side, even for me, right, when I was, again, a young writer, and in my mind at that time, I was like, I want to be able to ride in a tight pack like I see out here all the time.
Yeah.
Again, west coast of the U.S., there's good weather most of the year, a lot of club life out here, but something that I think goes underrated, and I think there's a lot of people's opinions about clubs and stuff like that, but regardless, if you come out here and watch these dudes ride together in a pack, it's impressive if you ride. Like, these guys are close, quick, and when they ride canes and stuff, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I want to be able to do that. And so on my own, before I would ride with people, or after I rode with people and realized how much my skill level lacked, I would change how I rode on my own. So maybe I would choose, a typical lane out here on the freeway. I could probably divide into 3 sections for motorcycles. And so I would just pick one that I could hold myself accountable on, and then try to ride that the whole time. And so that was like, again, maybe 10 years ago, that's how I was trying to practice on my own. And so it'd be the same thing in, I think, all aspects of life, but you want somebody who takes that seriously. And so like, that was me trying to do it at the time. But I think in the military, and then now at this point in my life, it's great to do things on your own. It's also really great to have somebody there and hold you accountable.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the best things you can do to be a good riding buddy is to be consistent on either end. So maybe you're the newer rider and you have somebody who's willing to work with you and improve your skill sets. They start with you where you're at, and then they bring you up to their level. But if you're willing to go and you're working to improve, I promise you that person is going to want to ride with you more. The same way in the military, nobody just starts doing things with anything combative, right? So shooting guns or maneuvering or anything, and it's just good at it. It takes a mentor, and it takes somebody who is willing to teach you until you're at a point where you can start to improve on your own. And so I think that the same way I had people who would work with me on different skills. I remember, so for me as an officer, something that we're famous for, at least in the U.S. military, is getting lost and not shooting our weapons, right? And so people, like on the enlisted side, make fun of us a lot for those things, which is funny. And I do appreciate it. But at one of the selections that I was at, we were doing a 2-gun competition. And for me, I wanted to perform well. And this is something that I was working on my own before I even showed up to this process. But before it happened, I really was asking a lot of questions to some of the enlisted guys who were proficient at this and did a lot of this competitively on their own. So they competed at 2-gun competitions and things like this. And I was like, hey, like, what pointers? And then I was working with them. And I think that because I showed an interest level and I was working at it, they took the time to put that effort and that teaching into me. And I was able to do well at this event. And so I think the only way that I was able to do that was purely because of them. But the same way with riding, if you want to be a better rider and you are like, hey, I think that you're pretty good at riding, I would like to be better, I will ride with you whenever you want. I promise you that person will take you and help you become better.
Yeah.
So I think that willingness is crucial.
Huh. That makes perfect sense. So if we were making a list, if we were standing here with a whiteboard, we would just add to that list that being a great riding buddy means either being willing to mentor or being willing to be mentored.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
I would say the willingness to put in time.
Yeah. Boy, our egos get in the way of that sometimes, don't they?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's good. That's a good one. So here's number two. This is going to seem super obvious, but it seems to me from observation that being reliable matters, right down to kind of showing up when you're supposed to show up and being ready to put your kickstand up when it's time to do that, and having your tent rolled up and packed away at the assigned departure time and all that stuff. You teach people that you're going to do what you say you're going to do. That seems to matter when you're functioning in a group or when you're, in a high stress situation with another rider. Would you say that's true?
Yes, I would say. I would think about it just from the perspective of if you see somebody roll up on a bike that does not look like it's maintained well, I don't want to ride next to that person. So I think that kind of how you do one thing is how you do all things.
Yeah.
And so if somebody shows up and their stuff's not packed, or they left a bunch of stuff, like if you're going on a trip and they left a bunch of stuff, or their bike, again, just doesn't look well maintained, I don't trust them to be a great rider or to be caring about me the whole time. Because I feel like if they don't care about their own stuff, why are they going to care about mine?
Right.
So I think that would be, one of the first things that I look for in that.
Yep. Again, I mean, these will seem very obvious to you, but I never actually kind of sat down and tried to deconstruct this before now. So I guess kind of knocking on from that, a third one would be, I've kind of mush these together to be prepared and be useful. So I found, the guys that I ride with are, if you had to put a label on them, you would say they were adventure riders. And there's just this understanding that guy's always got a tire kit, and this guy's always got, a pump, and that guy's always got a, 10 mil socket or whatever it is, that there's not necessarily a lot of duplication, but there's a sense that everyone will come ready to play their part and be willing to contribute to group preparedness. So it's not just a question of I'm ready, but it's I'm ready to play my assigned role on the team. I mean, don't laugh, but one of the things that's expected of me is to have Starbucks coffee pouches. I wish I was.
I'm sorry, I did laugh right away.
I wish I was making that up, but it's true. So that's my third one, to be prepared and be useful. Would you agree that's a condition?
Yeah, I think even down to the Starbucks pouches. Again, maybe it sounds silly, but not everybody can contribute, and in the same way.
Yeah.
So everybody needs to be able to contribute, but not everybody can contribute in the same way. And I think again, we're drawing a lot of, I would say, my personal experiences with military, and then I'm bringing it back into biking. So I think about a lot of times we would get in these young soldiers, young rangers who, are just freak athletes, just motivated young people who are way more physically healthy, capable, and willing than I would say most of the people at my age were,
right.
And those that were older than me. However, the people that were older had the experience. So they were able to tell these young people with all this energy and excitement what to do, what to carry, and where to go. And then that was what they were contributing. And then these young people were able to contribute. Maybe they were really fast, so they contributed that skill. Or they were really good at shooting, so they were able to contribute that skill. Or they were just a brick house and could carry everything, so they contributed that skill. Because they couldn't contribute making decisions because they weren't ready to yet. The same way that like some of the people who were older couldn't carry or couldn't shoot or couldn't, move the same way they used to, but they could make decisions because they'd been there. And so everybody, I think, contributes different things in a group setting. And it should be the same way, I would say, with the people that you're riding with. And I think the key there is being able to communicate.
Yeah.
So you would hope that like the veteran riders would be like, hey, we have all this stuff set up. Can you bring this? Because this is what we're missing. Or for some person to know what to bring to the table, or what is missing at least. And so I think that is something that for us would most often be the senior enlisted within our platoon or within a company who is helping identify those things, because they've been around the longest and they've been making decisions the longest. So they were able to identify those things for especially those young new guys.
Yeah. Yeah, that's contribute is a great word. I do appreciate that these are all softball questions, and I don't expect you to say no to any of them, by the way. But this is my journey of discovery. So the fourth one that crossed my mind from my limited experience was that you have some kind of duty to be good company, and I kind of, sort of especially mean not to complain or be needy. It's even better if you can be funny or tell stories or be supportive in some other way. But I remember listening to you on another podcast talking about the suck, which I never heard that term used as a noun before. But I think the entire phrase was embracing the suck or something like that. But the sense of it that I got was that that you reach a point where you do more than accept that what you're going through is hard. You absorb it or something. Anyway, so that's kind of. That kind of touches on this thing about not complaining, but more broadly, I think there's a responsibility to be good company. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I have a ton of thoughts about this, but I think one of the first things that comes to mind is on the military side of things. There's two different processes that. In the U.S. Army, you can take to be a ranger, and they're two totally separate things.
Right.
So one is called being ranger qualified, which is where you go to ranger school, which is a 62-day course where you hike a lot and you're with a lot of different people and you pretend war that whole time. And it's a miserable experience. I tell people all the time, I've been through, I would say, different hard physical things in my life. And I have never been more miserable in my entire life than I was in ranger school. So it's a miserable experience. Wow. So having somebody who doesn't make it worse is one of the best assets you can have. That's great. And part of that process, though, is there's 3 phases of that school. And after every phase, you have what's called peer evaluations. And so maybe somebody physically and intellectually passed everything, but they were miserable to be around and nobody enjoyed their company. Then in those peer evaluations, you say that. And the people who perform the worst in that are still dropped from the course. Wow. So if you're a prick, you're still going to be dropped, even if you're good at everything. And then that was the same thing that I found going into Ranger Regiment. So Ranger School is something that's open to all the U.S. Armed Forces. I had people from the Navy, the Air Force, the Marine Corps. They were all in my Ranger School class. And it's a leadership course that also teaches ground infantry tactics. So it's a beneficial thing, but it's also kind of a badge of pride that you can wear.
Right.
Ranger Regiment is a special operations unit. And so that's a much more intense physically and intellectually to even get in. On the officer side, you're looking at, the top, like a lot of the guys that I was able to go there with are the top dudes in the Army at the time, at least in the combat arms branches. So they're just phenomenal, wonderful people to work with who are also really good at their job. But the way they keep it that way is in that same thing, in that selection process that you go through to go to Ranger Regiment, you have peer evaluations as well. And so maybe these people are studs and they're really good at their job, but they're miserable to be around. They still will not be a part of that unit. And I thought that was one of the greatest assets that they had. In addition to that, when I was in Ranger Regiment, we periodically did it still. And it was just so that we could check ourselves. So the people that you work with, the people that work above you, the people that work under you, and then your peers all evaluate you. And you get these things. And it was, this might sound trivial, but sometimes it was like, hey, your haircut's stupid. And so people lose respect for you when you enter the room. You need to change it. Wow. And so, a haircut sounds like a trivial thing, but it also taught people that hey, your first impression matters. How people will respect you and expect you to command a room is a lot in part by how you present yourself. Right. And so that was an important lesson to learn. Or, hey, I know that you understand what you're talking about, but you mix up these words a couple times and you lose credibility. So fix that. Or, hey, like when you write reports, your reports suck. So this is how you fix it. But you get all this feedback from everybody around you and it allows you to improve. So I think that with that, you learn how not to be a miserable person to be around and bad company. And so everybody that I was able to work with after a period of time, sometimes people did get dropped or some people were let go or changes were made because people were not good and they were not a good fit or they were miserable to be around. And if they didn't make those changes after they were given correction, they were gone. And that's the way it should be to keep somebody or a group close. And I think that that's the same thing that, like, if you're riding with people and there's one dude who's always miserable or unprepared or, is maybe just doesn't mesh with the group well because of his personal beliefs or whatever, people are going to get rid of him or not invite him anymore. So we self-select, I think, on the civilian side. Yeah. But I was so grateful to learn those skills on the military side in that level because it's important. If you don't like the people you're around, it hinders the whole process.
Yep. I love the what you said at the outset about not making it worse. It doesn't seem to fit into motorcycling until you're camping somewhere and it's pouring rain and everything's wet and nothing's going the way that it was supposed to go and somebody forgot to bring whiskey. Then it really actually matters that somebody's not making it worse. That was brilliant.
I think sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
I was going to say specifically in motorcycling, I think that it's, I think, again, motorcycle in general, the best form of therapy there is. Yeah. And that includes that whole trip experience. So when you're going out and you're camping with people, if you have, and again, everybody has different groups of friends and different people they mesh with. So I'm trying not to think of like something that would exclude certain people because some people are, they mesh in that way. But like, let's say like you have a Christian group that's very Christian oriented and there's one guy who's super not Christian and not doing Christian things. For those people who are going to get their therapy and their break from the world and reset, that can be a hindrance to that. And so it doesn't make him a bad person. It just means he's not meshing with that group. Yeah. And can hinder that process. So I think it's, again, it's important to know who you're riding with for that reason as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I can think of 100 other examples. And it actually kind of leads to the sort of fifth, my fifth lightning round point, which was, I don't know how to put this exactly, but it's got something to do with not disrupting the hierarchy. So what I mean is if you've been in, I think this is especially true if you're being invited into a group as opposed to a one-on-one situation, but I think it can even apply in the latter case too. You're walking into an established, functioning team that has, if not formally, at least informally, a kind of hierarchy. So with the guys that I ride with, the guy who leads pretty much always does that, and he's very natural in that role. His probably closest buddy in the group is the sweep rider almost always. And I think you go into that situation and you say, okay, I see how these guys work together. I see how this unit, if I can borrow that word, functions. And the last thing I'm going to do is try to assert my alpha credentials and displace somebody in one of those roles or even fail somehow to respect them, if that makes sense. So I think it could be a little hard for independent-minded people like motorcyclists, but I think if you're going to be that person introducing yourself into a group, it would behoove you to be quiet and pay attention to how the group works before you try to find your place in it. Maybe is a kinder way to put it. Does that ring true for you?
Yeah, for sure. I think that there should always be a get to know you period, right? Where, like, just because maybe. Let's say my family's going on a ride and we invite somebody new with us. So we're trying to get them to know them and their abilities and who they are as a person just as much as they're trying to get to know us. But if that person comes in and is like, hey, you guys should change this, or this is how you really should do things. I can promise you that person probably will not come back. Just because that attitude and that way of thinking probably just wouldn't jive with us. Now, in certain situations, maybe that works, but it just wouldn't for us in our established group. Especially because I think when things work, like sometimes you don't have to fix things if they aren't broken, right? Yeah. So if something's moving along and you can be a part of that, that can be a wonderful thing. And then you don't have to rush to change things. You can just be a part of the natural flow of things as they change.
Yep.
And that can be wonderful. And I think, again, it kind of goes back to, I can imagine if we had young people in the military tell some of the older people what to do in that aspect. Where they're like, hey, you know what? You really screwed up back there. Like, that just would never happen. Yeah. I can't imagine. I think someone's head would blow up. It just, I don't know how that would work. And so I think that it would just be seen as offensive, I think, in any category of life, especially in the motorcycle community with people who ride together often. Yeah. If you're the new rider, I think it just would be common courtesy to kind of go where they tell you to until you learn a lot more about it. And so I would say you travel with these people often, or you start to do individual trips with maybe some of those people who ride together, and then you can talk openly. But I said before that, I would reserve all opinions until later and just get to know each other and see if this is something that you want to do more. Yeah.
I agree. You mentioned something earlier in this conversation that kind of felt like it needed to be added to this list. And it had something to do with self-awareness. I don't remember exactly how you put it, but it strikes me that if you ride alone, you can con yourself all day long about how good you are and how cool you are. But the minute you put yourself into a social context, that same con job can get you into a ton of trouble. So if you're going to commit to riding with, to having a regular riding buddy, a mentor or someone that you mentor, or a group, or I suppose a pillion, you actually can't con yourself. You have to be honest with yourself about your skill level, about your attitude, and about what you're willing to sacrifice to ride with that person or that group. You really need to know who you are. I'm not sure whether this was the theme on which you were worried that you were being too philosophical, which is impossible on this podcast. But I think philosophical is the right word for this. Do you want to expand on that at all, this notion of self-awareness? Did I ask a really long question there?
No, I think that's, I would say, like, if I was making a list, I would say that I want to only be surrounded by self-aware people. Because I think that it's so important to know where you're at, and then again, where you've been and where you want to go. And self-aware people can do that. Now, that doesn't mean they're 100% accurate in all things and how everybody else perceives them, but they should know how they are perceived, and they should also know what they bring to the table. And so in riding, I would always, for me at this point in my life, I'm not saying I haven't been young and dumb and prideful, and it's times it still catches me, but I would say, if I went to go ride with a group that I'd never ridden with before, I would just say, hey, like, it's been a long time since I've ridden with a group like this. I've been riding for a while, but this is kind of where I'm at. And I'd just be very forthright about that. And I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about with that last point. I would never go into a situation and assume that I have enough knowledge about the people that I was riding with for the first time to make any judgment call or any correction.
Yeah.
Even if I've been riding longer than all of them combined, that wouldn't matter. It just would. That's how they do things. So my job is to be self-aware enough to observe and understand that I don't know everything. So I think that's one of the important aspects of it, especially with riding.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think the other edge of that blade is probably the need to be honest. We talked earlier about finding people who are like-minded, and you can't really do that if you're not being honest with them, never mind yourself. I mean, one of the worst riding experiences I ever had really came down to this issue. I met somebody at a social function, And it was kind of like, oh, you ride, I ride. We should get together and have a ride. We both ride the same brand of motorcycle, and that'll be awesome. I'll meet you here on that day. And in that moment, it seemed like it was enough that we were both motorcycle riders. Well, I showed up to have a chill day, enjoying the scenery and the sunshine, and he showed up for the final assault on the Death Star. And right, and so that's on me. I think we both wasted our time that day, and I should have been, if not directly, I should have somehow probed more to make sure that we were going to have similar expectations, or failing that he would know who he was dealing with. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I love that because I've had many similar experiences on both sides. So I think that there's certain routes that I'm super comfortable with and knew well, and I think one of the cool opportunities that I had when I was in college was my school connected to the Blue Ridge Parkway, which in the U.S. is one of the best, if not number one rated motorcycle ride in the country.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely gorgeous. And so I would just jump on there and just rip the Blue Ridge Parkway. So, but I would do that daily for years. And I got to the point where, especially the routes really close to the school, like it's very windy. A lot of times you're pulling 180-degree turns, and like it's just this beautiful combination where you have forestry that literally forms a canopy, and you're just cruising through the canyon. And anyway, I brought somebody with me who was new to riding, and I still feel bad about this because I felt like I would just lose them, and I felt like I was going slow, and I think they felt like they were going to die.
Right.
And so it probably was not an enjoyable experience. And then that's the same thing for me going back to the first time I rode with a motorcycle club. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to make it through this day. And I was just trying to keep up, and, I just eventually gave up and would catch them when I could. So I think that I've been that on both sides, and it is funny, but at this point in my life, I do like to surround myself with quality people over the riding ability if they're willing to work on it, because there is something for me that is wonderful about being with another rider who's at the same level that I am.
Yeah.
Or roughly, and we can cruise and we can communicate without actually having to talk, because that trust and that ability is there. And that's one of the, again, I think that it brings in a whole nother kind of spiritual, wonderful aspect of motorcycle riding and being in that moment with somebody else, versus maybe a new rider or somebody that far outskills you. You're so worried about that interaction that you're kind of missing the experience at the moment.
Yeah.
And so I think that for me, if I know their level, we can set up parameters to make sure that it's still enjoyable for both of us, where maybe somebody is not comfortable riding 2 up, and you're like, okay, well, let's stagger a little bit. What kind of length is comfortable for you? Or do you want to be on the inside or the outside of the lane, especially if they're the newer rider in the situation? And when you can set up those parameters for them, and then they're comfortable, then you can still enjoy that moment together, maybe just a little bit differently than you normally do. And so I think that, again, being self-aware, knowing those limitations and coming in and being honest about it can allow you to do that, and to, regardless of skill level, still have an enjoyable experience versus not setting those expectations up front.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And it sounds like you would be a great person to ride with. Hey, if you and I were on the Blue Ridge Parkway right now, and I turned to you and said, look, you ride your pace and just stop when you get to the first intersection, and I'll be there eventually. Would you do that, or would you stay with me?
I think it depends. I think through a conversation, if you can enjoy that experience on your own, and that allows you to, if I was gone from the equation and you could enjoy that beauty and stuff on your own without having to worry about me, then I probably would.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to take away from that. The same way that, like, I feel like if there was a reason, like, obviously if you came all the way down and we were riding that together, I'd probably be like, well, we should ride a little bit of this together and experience this moment together at this time. But I also would encourage you to probably have some time on your own. the same way I would want that as well. So I think that it would probably depend on it, but I think being honest about that. Hey, would you feel awkward if I went and ripped this cane and then there's a pull off and I'll catch you at the pull off?
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to communicate and balance that as well.
Yeah, it really does come back to communication again, doesn't it? Because I've certainly been in situations where I've made that offer to people and they've felt awkward about doing it, so they ride at my pace. And I mean, it's better now, but I mean, when I was first riding, they would ride at my pace, and I would just sit there feeling like an idiot, and it didn't feel like a win. I mean, if we'd been in a dangerous situation, I suppose I wouldn't have wanted to be abandoned, but otherwise, I think it might have been best if they'd ridden their own ride. It seems very granular and trivial, but it probably isn't for a lot of people.
No, I think that's very real. And like what you're saying, like I think that I've felt that way at times too, where I'm like, I'm just hindering this ride. And then I'm more self-conscious, I think, about those things than enjoying that moment. And so I think, again, that communication is probably the most important thing. Be like, hey, you know what? Like, I feel like I'm holding you back, and I'm not trying to just say this and say that, like going through that whole piece, but just being honest and real. I think that's probably the most important thing that you can have.
Yeah, I agree. This is going to seem like a random left field question, but you mentioned earlier. Well, you mentioned before we started recording that you had your eye on a big Triumph Tiger, and that, of course, it is an adventure bike, and that made me think about the Long Way series of. Have you seen any of those? The Long Way Around and Long Way.
Yeah, with McGregor.
Yeah, Ewan McGregor.
Yeah. Yep. So, I've watched most of them. Yeah.
So like one of the great studies in being a riding buddy, and in my opinion, and if I had to pick which one of those people I would want to ride with, 100% is Charlie Boorman. Like, this guy is good-humored to the bitter end. He seems to suffer with dignity. He's like totally my spirit animal for the skill of being a riding buddy. Whereas Ewan McGregor, charming as he is definitely more of a showboat, more of an extrovert. And Charlie seems to let him do that, which just makes Charlie all the more charming. So that's my love letter to Charlie Boorman. What do you think? Is he like? Would you share the view that he's a model for how to be a great riding buddy?
Yeah, and actually, I have this. And again, I'm going to screw up the names of them. Like, it's like the long way around, the long way up, long way down. But the one where they take the electric bike, so that's the initial plan. That's what they're trying to figure out. And it's been a while since they've done the previous one.
Yep.
And he's like, I think they link up for the first time since that previous filming, and it had been years. And so I think Ewan McGregor called Charlie and was just like, hey, I want to do this. Are you game? And he's like, yep. And I was like, that alone makes him a great riding buddy. Just that he was down to go. He's like, an adventure on bikes. Yes.
Yep.
Like, let's do it. And so I think that attitude can absolutely be one of the best assets. I know that not everybody has that luxury in life where they can drop everything to go ride. So I do understand that, but I think it captures an attitude. And I think that oftentimes at this point, there's like a give and take with riding. So for me, I have a son who's 1 year old. He's almost 2, and I don't want to give up time with him. Also, I can't ride with him yet, and so for me, if I'm with people that want to do a ride, or if I want to go do a ride, I try to schedule it around him, or I try to make accommodations to make sure that he can be. If I'm going point A to point B, that he's at point B when I get there.
Right.
And so that's something that's changed. And it also changes the people that I ride with and how we ride together. And, when you're down to go ride. So I think that also changes things. But people that are willing to work with you, I think that's what you want, right? So if somebody's like, hey, I really want to, I guess in that case where Ewan McGregor's like, I want to ride from South America all the way through North America. Would you like to do that? It's like, yeah, but let me make some accommodations and let's schedule this a little bit better. So I think that somebody who's willing, and then also willing to set parameters up, and on both sides of that equation. If you have a riding buddy who has different stipulations than you, that's part of being a good riding buddy. Like, hey, I want to do this ride. When can you do it? When works for you? Like, I don't know everybody, but I think I'm in a weird spot in my life where I have friends who are retired and I have friends who are pretty much in college. And so I think that my friends who are retired are typically pretty down to go do stuff. My friends who are in college have social things, have family things, have no money, like there's a lot more issues with them. And then I'm at a point where I have my son and family and nieces and nephews. And so I think that everybody working together to accommodate that can make that community like something else. It makes it family life, right? So I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
If you have somebody who's always down, but willing to adjust for you as well.
Yeah. I agree. Somebody once explained it to me this way. They said, that you should only have two answers available when someone makes a proposal like that, and the two answers are either hell yes or no. But nothing in between. No, yeah, but, and maybe we could, and I think that's the spirit of Charlie.
Yeah.
Just on the subject of character still, I wonder if a great riding companion is necessarily friendship material, or whether they have to be, whether those two things have anything in common, or is it enough that a riding buddy is just dependable and serious about doing this, and you can count on them? Do those things vend? If I want to bring somebody into my riding life, am I implying that we're going to have a relationship beyond that?
My personal opinion is no, absolutely not. Where I know that for me on the soldier side, I have people that I would go to war with any day. But if they called me and they needed me for something, or I called them and needed them for something, that they would be there at the drop of the hat. I also don't know if I'd want them to hang out with my family.
Right.
So I think that you can have those. And I think that for me, if I have the opportunity, I think a great riding buddy would be somebody who wants to, again, like to ride until they just can't, until the bike goes down or they do, right? Like they just, we have 5 days. That means we can do probably 6,000 miles. Let's go. So like for me, that's my side of things. But I also know that like, so a good riding buddy would be somebody who just wants to do that, or who has the same mindset, or even the ability to do that. That doesn't necessarily mean that we would hang out all the time or go to the gym together or raise our kids together. So I think that, yeah, great riding buddies can be people that you catch up with. I think that you can have different people in your life for different reasons, and everybody can offer different things at different times. So I don't necessarily think that your riding buddy also has to be your best friend.
Right. Interesting, because I kind of wondered if the flip side of that question was, if you ride with someone long enough, are they inevitably going to become a friend anyway? And I think what you're telling me is that there's a paradigm for this relationship that can be confined to motorcycles and work perfectly well that way. Am I summarizing that accurately?
Absolutely. I think that, yeah, there's people who, again, I think can step into that role specifically for what it is. And it doesn't have to be anything more or less. And then it can be that relationship and beautiful for what it is.
Yeah, right. Well, and I'm sure there are people, rolling their eyes at this question, wondering how it is that I've managed to get this far through life without, this wisdom. But, we do love this so much. And, you and I have been riding for similar amounts of time, and I hear the passion still in your voice, and I still feel it. And so after a small group of people, it's the most important thing to me. And so building a relationship on it feels important. And I don't have the equipment to kind of know how to deal with that, which I think you're kind of helping me with.
Well, I think sometimes and this is going to be, I don't mean to blow up the question in any way, but I think sometimes the best riding buddy you can have is yourself. And that what I mean by that is there's been times where I wanted to do something and nobody in my riding circle at the time could or was able to. And so I made those decisions on my own. I remember the first time I wanted to go across the country. And I was like, I just really wanted, like, I don't know why, I just had an itch to do it, even just not to record it, not to do anything more, but just to have that experience. And I remember some of the people that I rode with were like, that's dumb. You should never do that by yourself. Some of my family was a little bit worried just about anything happening when you're on the road. And I understand that's a long trip.
Yeah.
You're putting a lot of miles in. And all of those factors in. But for me and the riding buddy I needed at that time was somebody who would do it. And I knew that for my own headspace and for my own growth, both in the sport and in life. And so I think that at times you have to do those things on your own and support yourself. And so I think that that's kind of a weird way to say that, but I think that you can be a great riding buddy for yourself. Like, prepare well so you can enjoy it, learn from your mistakes, and go do things. And then along that path, you're going to find people that will fit that mold. Whereas if you only stick with your current circle and you don't branch out of that, you may never fully understand or meet the people that you need to, who could be those riding buddies or that riding group or family or whatever you need.
Yeah.
If you never step outside of it and ride by yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I don't think that's dumb at all. I love that idea of being your own best riding buddy. I imagine that's the thing I'm going to think about the most after we're finished here. I want to go back to something that you touched on earlier, just to see if there's any more there for us. Sometimes you hear people talk about, this guy's been riding for, 30 years and he's got, 500,000 miles under his belt. And you always quietly wonder to yourself, especially if they're the ones saying this, you always quietly wonder to yourself, do they really have 500,000 miles under their belt, or do they have 1 mile 500,000 times? And you mentioned earlier that riding with someone who's important to you, or riding with a group that's important to you, kind of comes along with a motivation to improve, to make yourself better, to sort of stay, worthy and keep evolving. I think that might be one of the best reasons to have a riding buddy or a group, and maybe one of the best reasons to kind of be one. That's maybe one of the biggest things we might get from it. Do you think that's true?
I think, yes, I do think it's absolutely something that we pull from it, and that I would say contributes to the experience as a whole. But I also think that sometimes I'm trying to think how to explain this now. Okay, so with me saying being your own, like your best riding buddy, I think I mean that in the fact if there's things outside of your current riding group or your riding buddy that you want to experience. And so I think that if you are content and you are happy and fulfilled, then that's perfect. If you have things that you want to do and you always feel like you're driving people along with you, or you feel like you want to change something but you don't know how, or you're afraid that it will offend your riding buddy or change that dynamic,
right,
then I think that's when you need to make that step. So I think it can go both ways. And I don't think there's anything wrong with, again, when I said if something's not broke, don't fix it. So if you have something great going on, I think then it's perfect. But I think that if there's ambition, then that's totally different. Where you need to get out and start doing the things that you want to meet the people that would fit into that group with you that you maybe don't know or wouldn't have the means to meet. Ideally, I think a great riding buddy would be there the whole way with you. Right. So like you expand on that. And I think that's kind of what you were saying.
Yeah.
But I think that I just wanted to clarify that I think if you have somebody who is in the same wavelength with riding with you, then that's what matters. I think so. I'm trying to think. Last year, I went from Phoenix to Boise in like a day. So Boise, Idaho, it's about 1,000 miles from here. And so I just tried to crush that out in literally a day, and was going to be up there for a day and then come back. And on the route, I tried to get a couple people to go with me. Nobody was able to, but I met so many people on that route there's something called like the Hoka Challenge, I think, which is, you're familiar. So like 1,000-mile days for like 10 straight days or something.
Yeah.
I got hit in the head with a hawk,
Jeez.
which it was like right at dusk, and it flew out. Like I was running through a canyon, it came out of the side, and literally I smacked it with my head. And I thought I was going to go down, but there was some people next to me who were riding. And so I stopped and talked to them. And so I was able to meet these people that now have relationships with throughout the country, who are people who I would ride with for those reasons. Hey, you just want to go throw down 1,000 miles today? Okay, I'll meet you here and we can just go do that. And that's something that like they do on their own and I can experience with them. And so I think that that's a great riding buddy.
Yeah.
They're encouraging me. They're checking in. They're following up or like asking, like, hey, what great rides have you done lately? I want to do something. Hey, I'm going to do this one if you're able to come. Like, so it's very flexible. And I think those are people that I really don't know them that well outside of, I can tell you what bike they ride. I can tell you where they've been going, but that's about it.
Yeah. That's interesting. Hearing you talk, so like the thoughts are kind of jumbled in my mind, but so I've spent a lot of time listening to people talk about why they ride motorcycles, and a really consistent theme in that is always solitude. The vast majority of things you read about riding, the sentiments people express when they talk about why they love it, so much have to do with being alone in their helmets. But clearly, the world divides into two on this subject. There are people who love to ride with groups or with people that are close to them, and there are people who absolutely prefer not to have any company at all. And although I've personalized a lot of my questions, it's actually that's interesting to me, which is, are we depriving ourselves if we don't give it a shot? And to hear you talk, it's almost as though riding with other people is like another kind of riding. So it's the same as having two different motorcycles in the barn, if that makes sense, where you can kind of choose the experience you're going to have, but your total motorcycling experience is going to be, impoverished if you miss one of them. Blathering a little here, but does that sound true to you?
I love that comparison that you just made, like riding with another person is sometimes like riding a different bike in your country, right? So I think that captures it perfectly. And there's pros and cons to each one.
Yeah.
And each one is built for a different purpose. So different riding buddies for different things, different bikes for different things. And sometimes that's the fastest bike you have by yourself. And sometimes it's the oldest and the pain in the butt bike with other people. Like it can be anything in between. But each experience is its own.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, we've talked about a lot of different things. And I just have, at this point in my life, I just have two bikes. One is an old Harley that, not that old, was a 2005 Dyna that I chopped up and made it a little more size appropriate for me. And since I did that, there has not been a stop in issues. So I ride it as much as I can. And there's always something constantly that I need to work on it. And granted, I think it had probably close to, I don't know, somewhere between 90 and 100,000 miles on it when I did that. So it was getting up there. And I did nothing to help preserve it. I just chopped up the bike and kept going. So like, it was probably at that point where there's going to be some, love and care needed, but, I love that bike, and there's so much pride that I have when I ride it, because I think, I'm decently active on social media, and, there's, every once in a while I'll post pictures on that bike or post the bike, and people sometimes just have like gnarly comments about it. And they're like, that bike sucks. I'm like, okay. Anyway, but I think about that, and it honestly does make me laugh because I'm like, okay, but I love it, and it's perfect for me. And so sometimes I love just taking that bike out, and there's a whole beautiful aspect of it because I was hit on that bike before. I had that bike, and that's the bike that I took initially across the country a couple of times. So there's all these stories and history with me and this bike, and then now that I was able to do something with it with my own hands, and I love that. And then I also love that I have this newer touring motorcycle that I can ride without, honestly getting that tired. And I can do 1,000 miles a day and be ready to go like right now, like I can stop and be like, you know what, let's just keep going. Like I love having a bike like that. That just performs so well. So I love both. And it's the same thing with people. I love riding with my family. Nothing replaces the time that I get with my dad or my brother. I enjoy that, but I also enjoy riding with other people or other bikes. I don't have my own right now, but I like borrowing adventure bikes and going and doing that. I like, every once in a while getting on, a crotch rocket and cruising. Right. So like, I love all of it. I love the whole sport. And so I think that the same way that you can have different people for different things in your life, you can have different motorcycles and different riding buddies. Yep. But what makes you a good one is somebody who's willing to go.
And you could say the same of bikes.
Yeah, also true.
Although the Dyna, you look like the soul of freedom on that thing. You'd never know from the pictures that it's been a minute of trouble for you.
I love it, and I actually do want to now put a jockey shift on it because I don't even know, primary issues and clutch issues, and I'm like, well, I might as well redo that now. But that's a project for another day. But I think she'll be with me forever. So
yeah,
what's the time?
I know the feeling. There was one more theme I wanted to just poke at a little bit while I've got you, and that has to do with leadership. So this is more of a question. These are more questions about being in a group, and especially being in a group and being the leader of that group. And as I wonder, I'm not sure if you've been in that role or not. Obviously, you were professionally, but I don't know as a biker. But would you say that the person in front of a group is its leader?
Not always. I think it's a very good question. And I think that it just depends. So going back to the ranger part of me, a ranger saying is rangers lead the way. Something that's repeated often. Repeat it to each other. Repeat it in the creed. You repeat it all the time. And so you are expected to lead from the forefront. Now, when I hear that, though, it's rangers lead the way, not I lead the way.
Right.
And so I think a lot of times we take it that way. Like, I am a ranger, I am leading the way. But I think that a leader knows when to be at the front and to set that pace, and when to sit back and when to let other people set the pace or to learn. And so like we were talking about, like mentoring other bikers.
Right.
Sometimes I think to push another biker, you have to be like, hey, I want you on my hip. This is your goal. I'm going to set the pace. Keep up with me. And you have to let them know that they can get to that level. Other times you have to let them do it. Hey, I want you to keep a good pace. I'm going to be right here the whole time. I'll push you from behind, but I want you leading the way. And I think it's the same thing, like just in life in general. You have to know when to be at the front, and then also when to let other people have that opportunity to take that time or to learn. And I think a good leader knows when to do both.
Right.
In the military, so I'm going to say like officers, I think people are like, oh, you're the officer, you're in charge. And I would say kind of. There's so many other dynamics to that whole thing where there's so many people around me that I need to trust, but also that need to trust me. And we each have a job or a role to do. And so very rarely should I be in the front in the military. My job was to control assets and people and things moving after getting a lot of input from those guys because they're the ones doing it. So I'm going to listen to them. I'm going to consult with them. I have somebody on my side who's been doing that a lot longer than I have. I'm going to talk to, who's going to make a lot of decisions. Right. And so I think it's the same thing as like, if you're getting in a group and you're riding and you're like, hey, you go ahead and lead. And this is kind of the lineup. So everyone's positions, let's take off. And that person leading is not giving hand signals, is missing exits, is not doing well or not setting a good pace. Then my job as a leader at that point, maybe being the more experienced rider, the organizer, or whatever, is to go get in front and set the tone.
Right.
Like, hey, you know what? Like, I hear you're trying. Let's go ahead. Let me try this for a little bit. And then maybe later you can try or whatever you need to do to get through that moment. But I would say like, there's been times where like just even in small groups, like 5, 6 dudes, having a couple new riders and having the person up front, like take off. And I'm like, cool, you can do that. They can't. So like getting in front of them and then setting a new pace. I'm like, hey, you can get next to me or you can get in the back, but like, I'm not going to leave the rest of these guys who are learning behind. There's no reason for that. So I think that, I think it's both. But I also think it's wonderful to not always be in the front. I love watching people ride and seeing what they do. And I like, at this point, I'm getting really into, I don't know, filming and art and that side of things, which I never have been remotely creative in my life. And I think now that I'm at this phase of my life, I'm enjoying that. And so I like letting people ride, and I like trying to get videos of them and capture those moments and give those back to them so they can remember, they can have those things. So I think that like, it's different. Being a leader, it can change and ebb and flow.
Yeah.
But I think it's giving people the opportunity to grow. I'm trying to think, this is a young football quote for me. But I was told, like great leaders make those around them better. So I think that like, that's what I would say was true in the military. And I think that's true in riding, is if you're a great leader, you elevate those around you. So if they're a new rider, you make them better than they were. If they're a great rider, you help them learn something new or keep up with them. But a great leader is somebody who elevates those people around them.
Yeah. Well, how could anybody argue with that? It has always struck me as hard to do from the front of a bunch of motorcycles. Those of us who ride have an independent streak, or we wouldn't probably ride. And so there's a bit of a herding cats. I mean, I have very limited experience being at the front of a group, and usually the job that I had was to show people where to go and set some kind of, pace for the group. And that was sort of it. And, the dynamics that were taking place behind me it seemed to me totally out of my control. And I think what I hear you saying is that this is about setting an example, would you say?
Yeah, I think sometimes it absolutely is. It's the example, and it's setting the pace for others. But it also comes through understanding like the group that you're riding with. So I think, again, to be a great leader, you have to know what's going on. So if you don't know the people you're riding with and you don't know their capabilities and you don't know where you're going, you're going to be a horrible leader.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think absolutely it can. It doesn't always have to be I honestly think being in the front's the easiest job, but I think that, great leaders are going to really just know their people, and that's how you know how to elevate them. Yeah.
Well, it's funny that you say that. You have many times in this conversation anticipated where my brain was going. When I was preparing for this episode, I was just trying to sort of do all the research I could, which is, part of my sort of process, and I ended up going down a rabbit hole to try to understand the kind of responsibilities that you had for people in your previous job, in your job with the Army. So your rank was captain, and I wanted to understand what does that mean? What is that person? Who is that person responsible for? And I found it interesting that the size of the group that you might be responsible for hovers somewhere around the maximum number of people you could possibly know personally and by name. And reflecting on this, I realized that my feelings about being part of a group shift significantly with the size of the group. So the larger it is, the less appealing it is. And I think that might be because members of a larger group are less invested in each other and therefore less likely to look out for each other. So classic, Bruce overthinks kind of moment. Did I grok that right? What do you think about that?
I think that's a great question. So I think that there are layers to the larger a group gets. So I wouldn't say that because I had, let's say, a group of 40 guys, like roughly, that I cared about one less than others. My ability to know those 40 guys at an intimate level and know them really well is also not super practical. Because I think to know somebody requires time. And sometimes you just don't have time. Or if you are dedicating that time evenly across the board, it's superficial. And so I think one of the great things about the military and how it's structured is different ranks have different levels and different responsibilities. So on the enlisted side, in an infantry unit, the first real leadership level is a team leader. So a team leader is going to have like 4 dudes underneath them. Then you're going to have a squad leader who has 2 teams underneath him with 2 team leaders. And then a platoon, which I was a platoon leader, right? In Ranger Regiment. And then I was also a platoon leader on the conventional side as well. And so that's roughly 40 guys. But so I would have 4 squad leaders underneath me. And then I also have an enlisted counterpart. So you have essentially 2 people at the top. You have an officer and an enlisted guy who are most senior. And then you have 4 squad leaders underneath you, who then have 2 team leaders underneath them. And then you just have your regular guys underneath those team leaders. So I'm not expecting you to have that diagram out. But with that, I tried very, very hard to know my counterpart very well. And then especially those 4 people right underneath me called squad leaders.
Right.
So I felt like my job was to know the squad leaders. Their jobs were to know their team leaders very well, along with their guys, but their team leaders like intimately well. They need to know everything about them. And then the team leader's job was to know everything about the guys underneath them. There's 3 or 4 guys, kids, spouses, birthdays, everything. And then if there's any issue with any of those things, it goes up the chain. So that's how I can stay connected at the lower levels. That doesn't mean that I didn't interact with them. I think that my interactions, I would typically, if I was stepping into a new leadership position, I would bring in those squad leaders and I would just be very honest. Like, hey, what questions do you have for me personally? But I will never lie to you about my personal life or about anything in the military. And I will be honest with you about, if you want to know if I think something's dumb or sucks, I will tell you. And I'll also tell you sometimes if that's what we have to do, but I will tell you my honest opinion. But what I expect from that is that stays here. And I also understand though that I expect you to have a similar relationship with your people as that trickles down. Because you serve the people that are underneath you. That's your job as a leader, is to truly serve them. So my job was my loyalty was first and foremost to them. So I was able to know them. I was able to know their families. I was able to know what's going on with them. And as that trust builds, then if something happens with the people underneath them, their team leaders who they care about, and then typically call them Joes, but they're lower enlisted guys. underneath those team leaders, if something happens with them, then they would have that trust with me to then let me be able to step in and handle it. But I think that that's kind of how that works. So I think that in larger groups, you still have fractions of people. Maybe there is a group that's large now that rides together. There's probably a group of people that have been riding together the longest.
Right.
So they probably are very close. And then they were able to bring in their own people. So like, maybe it started with 5 dudes and one guy's like, hey, my, cousin started riding. You mind if he comes in? Well, no, but then he's your responsibility.
Right.
And if things happens with him, he's responsible to the rest of the group for that. So I think that it's similar that way. But I think that I also loved every one of my guys. So I think that I was, this sounds weird. So I was overseas with, on the conventional side of the Army for about 12 months with the same group, and had different responsibilities over there. But for those guys, I got to spend a lot of time with them. Yeah. You're overseas a lot, and sometimes really bad conditions. And so sometimes, like, if you're pulling a guard shift, they're just sitting up there for hours. So I'd be able to go and talk to them. So I actually did get to know those guys fairly well. I know what was going on. But for other guys, when things were much more fluid and there's a lot of turnover and we didn't have as much downtime, then I did have to rely on those people right underneath me to kind of do that. But that's where that trust comes from. They would trust me that if they actually told me something, I would do something about it at my level. And I trusted them to tell me things if I needed to be involved.
No, that makes perfect sense, actually. And I suppose, as you say, the same thing with a large group, maybe in a club setting, for example, the same thing kind of probably happens organically. But I think the root of the question was, does it matter that you're invested personally in the group? And I think I hear you saying, in one way or another, it does. You don't have to be invested in every single relationship, but certainly the ones that are closest to you and in the idea of the group, that requires investment personally in order to, to contribute and be safe. If I can, reduce it to that.
Yeah, well, and I think again, like, let's say smaller group scale, and you ride with people all the time to introduce somebody new. Whoever that person's connected to, if he needs something, you would expect that person that you've been riding with for a while to be his liaison to the rest of the group, at least initially. I think that that's kind of how those dynamics and those friendships are formed. So you would still obviously care about that person because you care about the person you've been riding with for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's important to him. So then it becomes important to you. And so you maybe don't know him as well because you haven't known him for as long as they have, but that relationship can build over time. But that foundational group, I think, the respect for each other will allow that group to grow and to care about each other, even if it does grow and become large.
Yeah. Do you think there are people out there? Do you think there are riders out there who will just never be cut out for this? People who are incapable of teaming up?
Yeah. I actually do. And I think that it's not going back to one of the attributes that we talked about for being, I think, a good riding buddy is being self-aware.
Yep.
I think some people lack self-awareness to a degree that they will never be able to ride consistently with the group and feel connected to them. That doesn't mean that I think there's probably people, and I don't want to speak on behalf of any club, but there's probably people in clubs who people genuinely only allow to be around because they're a member of that club. But they don't enjoy their company, or that person is a showboat or an a-hole or gets in trouble or whatever. And that can be frustrating. And so I think that there are some people who maybe just lack that self-awareness to progress or to be a contributing member of a group. And so that doesn't mean that I think that some people will never fit into or enjoy rides with those people. I just think that a consistent group, I'm sure there are people who lack self-awareness to ever be a true contributing member of a group long term.
Right. And so it's funny that you zeroed in on that theme of self-awareness, because I was going to sort of poke a little bit at, what if I want to want this to be a bigger part of my life, and I want to be better at it. And I'll speak for the whatever 50% of people out there who ride alone, who might be tempted to change their minds about that. What should I be working on? And so now I bet your answer is going to be getting to know who you are.
Yeah, I think being self-aware and also just connecting with people.
Yeah,
I think one of the biggest things, if somebody, so I have a love-hate relationship with social media. I didn't have it for a long time because of the military. So I got it after I left, and have loved some of the people that I've connected with, both randomly and then purposefully because I enjoy their content. And so that's been a way to actually find people who are similar to me or like-minded enough to where I'm like, I think I would like to ride with these people, and has allowed them to find me as well. And so I think that it was probably a few weeks ago. I had somebody reach out, and he's like, hey, dude, we have a bunch of dudes who ride together, all different kinds of bikes. Would love for you to come out. And lately I've been able, I've had my son a lot on the weekends. And so I haven't been able to coordinate a lot of times when other groups ride together that I don't know as well. And so I wasn't able to go, but it's something that I want to do in the future and just go ride and meet these people. They're local. We grew up in the same area. We've probably ridden a lot of the same roads, all different kinds of bikes. So I enjoyed that conversation and talking about why people ride what they do or what they're able to do on their bikes that I can't or that other people can't. And so I think that that's something I look forward to, but I never would have made that connection without social media and without being able to see oh yeah, this person rides enough to where I probably would ride with them, or they identify with some of the same things that I do. So I think that has allowed me to. So I'd say if you want to ride with other people, either do those rides. So if you want to go on longer rides, start doing longer rides by yourself.
Right.
Get comfortable with it. And then as you do that, look for people who do. You'll either find them on the road, or if you do social media or anything like that, you can find people who do those things in your area. And it's not that weird to reach out. We're a community that loves to support each other. I think if I see somebody, regardless of what they're riding, if they're on the side of the road, especially here in the summertime, I'm going to stop and make sure they're okay. Because they probably won't last that long on the side of the road here when it's 120. But
right.
I also think that that's part of that community, and I've had people do that for me as well. So I think that if you reach out to somebody, even if you don't know them at all, you might make a connection and build a friendship. I had somebody not that long ago either, that club member reached out to me. It's like, hey, we're having an event or we're going on a ride and we're just hanging out. You want to come hang out with us? Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to just meet you guys and be able to go on a little ride and hang out. So I think that's been a huge thing for me in riding with different people, making connections has been the social media aspect. But prior to me having social media, it was just going and literally meeting people on the road and connecting with them. When I was in, again, Virginia and lived on the Blue Ridge Parkway, there wasn't that many people. I didn't know anybody really that rode for a couple of years. And so when I would meet people on the Blue Ridge Parkway, I'd just talk to them. And it's like, hey, well, I'm going to ride this part, this weekend. You want to link up and ride it? Yeah. And that was it. That was the extent of the relationship. But that was how I met those people, was literally just through doing it.
Putting it out there, as they say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think be the person that you want to meet.
That's pretty good too. I see your career as a public speaker is going to be very successful. That's a good one too. Yeah. And it's funny. I mean, you're right about the community. And I think lots of motorcyclists are kind of, reserved and loners. And yet, as you point out, the community that's available to us is a lot more welcoming and patient than maybe a lot of other communities are these days. And maybe it's okay if you try and you just, fail and move on. That's the worst that could happen. And the best that could happen is, you might get your life changed.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, what's the worst that happens if you're going to ride with somebody and they leave you in the dust? okay, then you probably won't ride with them again. And that's one less person you have to worry about trying to be a riding buddy with.
Right. Right.
But it was a good experience. It's a learning experience. It's an opportunity to grow.
Yeah.
And then you know what questions to ask next time. Like all of those things that kind of we talked about earlier was I didn't know how to adequately articulate my abilities on a motorcycle until somebody asked me, and I realized I did not deliver an accurate message.
Right.
And so I learned over time how to communicate that. So I think it's not a lost experience.
Amazing. That is a great attitude. Bubba, this has just been so much fun. I feel like I've learned a ton. I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't think I needed to know any more about riding with people, but you've given me a lot to think about, and I really appreciate that. So thank you so much for having it with me.
Thank you for just the conversation. I genuinely enjoy just communicating with people. I think that we'll have stories and experiences and things that are unique to us that we were blessed with, and it's important to share them. So if you keep them to yourself, like, again, if you ride by yourself, I love that. And sometimes that's the most important thing that you can do.
Yeah.
But there's also something beautiful about being in that moment with another person. And it's like, again, having multiple bikes and getting to ride them all. So thanks for having this conversation and let me be a part of it.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And, I don't know why on earth you would ever be in Ontario, Canada, but if you ever are and you need a bike to ride, you sound like a guy I could trust with mine, and I'd be happy to tag along. In the meantime, I hope things cool down out there for you and ride safe.
I appreciate it. And same, if you find yourself in the Arizona area and there's anything I can do for you, or you'd love to go on a ride, please reach out and we'll do it.
Awesome. Take care, man.
All right, you too.
Bye now.
Bye.
Well, sometimes you think you know what an episode is going to be about, only to be set straight by a guest who sees things a little more clearly than you do. Even among so many great insights and so many great bits of advice, Bubba Eisenhauer left me with one thundering truth about the art of being a riding buddy. That it's not how that's important, it's why. Well, some of us, especially those who began riding as adults, do it, I think, as a way to find ourselves. Well, that might sound a bit self-helpy, and it's not always a matter of existential crisis, of course, but even the most well-adjusted motorcyclist will admit to riding to clear the noise from their minds, which is not a very long way from getting back in touch with who they are. Reverend Kusala Bhikshu in episode 32 called it the autonomy of separateness, and it's often motorcycling's most powerful effect. But it also has a shadow side, and it is that eventually we can start to believe that there's a link between feeling good and being alone. We start to think that the only way to feel secure in the world is to separate from it. And while that will sometimes be true, it is probably no way to live a life. Reading over my notes after editing this episode, I was struck by how clear this was in Bubba's mind. On the subject of not riding alone, he spoke over and over about openness, about trust, about, quoting him here, letting you into this part of my life, and about the sacred privilege of, here in Bubba's words again, being in that moment with somebody else. Well, this is somebody who sees a motorcycle not just as a way to feel good, but also as a way to be good. As a vehicle not only for escaping the world, but also for coming back to it, on a path that can perhaps only be illuminated by a headlight in your rearview mirror. Well, thanks for listening. You'll find show notes for this episode at thismotorcyclelife.com. That's also how you can reach me if you have questions, comments, or suggestions about the show. thismotorcyclelife@gmail.com works too. You'll also find me on Instagram, where I'm at thismotolife, and where you can find many of the people I've interviewed for this podcast, including Bubba Eisenhauer. And he told me he'd love to hear from you. Well, that's it for me, and that's it for episode 54. Until next time, be well, and keep staying alive out there.